Have you ever felt your heart pound with desperate fury as someone's selfish control threatens the life of someone you love? Picture this. You're clutching your phone, hearing over your emergency radio that the ambulance racing to save your husband is being stopped at your neighborhood gate over a rule about maintaining the community vibe. How would you react if a power-hungry HOA leader stood between your spouse and life-saving care, waving a rule book like it's above the law? I'm Daniel Harper, and this is the nightmare my husband Ethan and I faced, a story of love tested by tyranny, resilience in the face of injustice, and a community transformed by courage. For over 25 years, I've served in emergency services, running into danger while others flee. 6 months ago, I became the fire chief of Magnolia County, Georgia, a role that brought Ethan and me to the pristine gated community of Willow Grove Estates. We thought it would be a sanctuary, a place where Ethan, who's been battling lupus for nearly a decade, could thrive despite his condition. But we didn't anticipate the iron grip of Eleanor Prescott, the HOA president who treated her regulations like sacred commandments, turning our dream into a battlefield. Imagine you're in my shoes, watching your partner struggle while a petty tyrant blocks every accommodation you need. What would you do next? Would you confront Eleanor head-on, risking her wrath? Or would you try to work within her rules, hoping for compromise? Share your choice in the comments below. Let's see what you'd do. If you're as outraged by HOA injustice as I am, please hit that subscribe button for Daily Narrated Stories. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, and your support will help us share more stories of resilience and justice every day. Let's build this community together. I've spent my life running into danger as others flee. I can still smell the smoke from my first fire as a volunteer firefighter in my small Georgia hometown. A barn blaze that threatened a family's livelihood. I was just 19, trembling with adrenaline, but I ran toward the flames while others backed away. That moment set the course of my life. Over the next 25 years, I climbed the ranks, firefighter, lieutenant, captain, and eventually deputy chief in Fulton County. Each promotion came with scars. The burn on my forearm from a collapsing roof. The nightmares after a failed rescue, where I couldn't save a young mother from a burning car. Her screams still echo in my quiet moments. But every life saved made it worth it. The child I carried out of a smoke-filled apartment. The elderly man I revived after a heart attack. When Magnolia County offered me the fire chief position, it felt like the culmination of all those years, a chance to lead, to save lives on a larger scale, to implement the safety protocols I'd spent decades refining. But this move wasn't just about me. It was about Ethan, my husband of 15 years, whose health had been declining steadily. Ethan's lupus, a chronic autoimmune disease, had turned our once active life into a series of calculated risks. We used to spend weekends kayaking on Lake Lanier, the sun glinting off the water as we laughed over nothing at all, the paddle dipping rhythmically into the cool waves. Now, those memories felt like a distant dream, faded photographs in an album we rarely opened. Lupus flare-ups were unpredictable. Some days he could walk with a cane, his smile bright despite the pain. Others he was bedridden, his joints swollen, his energy sapped by a body that seemed to betray him at every turn. I'd watch him struggle to button his shirt, his fingers trembling, and feel a helplessness I'd never known in my career. Willow Grove Estates, with its accessible single-story homes and proximity to a top-tier medical center just 10 minutes away, seemed like the sanctuary we needed. The steep HOA fees, $500 a month, felt like a small price to pay for a space where Ethan could maintain some independence, where I wouldn't have to worry every time I left for a shift. Ethan and I met 15 years ago during a routine fire drill at the community center where he worked as a social worker. I can still picture him that day, standing in the courtyard with a group of seniors, his voice calm and steady despite the blaring alarms. He guided them to safety with a quiet confidence that made my heart skip, his dark hair ruffled by the wind, his hazel eyes catching the sunlight. That evening, I found him in the parking lot, his hands shoved into his pockets, and asked him to dinner. He laughed, a warm, unguarded sound that felt like home, and said yes. We've been a team ever since. I fell for his kindness, his dry humor, The way he could make anyone feel seen, from a struggling teen to a lonely senior. Those qualities became even more evident after his lupus diagnosis 8 years ago, a moment that tested us both. The early signs of Ethan's illness were so subtle we almost missed them. He'd come home from work exhausted, his eyes heavy after a short walk, the lines on his face deeper than they should have been for a man in his 30s. I'd catch him wincing as he massaged his hands, blaming on too much typing, his fingers swollen and stiff. A butterfly-shaped rash across his cheeks appeared one summer. A faint red bloom he dismissed as a sunburn. "I'm fine, Daniel," he'd say, brushing off my concern with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. But I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in the way he moved, the way his laughter grew quieter. After months of tests, blood draws that left his arms bruised, MRIs that hummed ominously, endless waiting rooms with stale coffee and flickering lights, a rheumatologist finally delivered the diagnosis: systemic lupus erythematosus. It felt like a punch to the gut, the air leaving my lungs as the doctor explained what it meant. Lupus was a lifetime of managing a disease with no cure, a progressive condition that attacked his organs, his joints, his very ability to live the life we'd built together. Ethan's diagnosis changed everything. He had to step back from his career, a loss that hit him hard. He'd loved his work, helping at-risk youth find their footing, giving them the support he'd wished for as a kid growing up in foster care. I'd find him late at night, staring at old photos of his clients, his eyes glassy with unshed tears. "I feel like I'm letting them down," he'd whisper, his voice breaking. But even on his worst days, when the pain kept him in bed, the covers pulled tight around him, Ethan found ways to contribute. He started mentoring teens online, his voice gentle through the laptop screen as he helped them with homework or just listened to their struggles, his own pain etched into the lines of his face. "I can't control what lupus does to me," he'd say, his hazel eyes steady. "But I can control how I fight back." His resilience was a quiet fire, one that kept me going even when I felt helpless watching him suffer, my hands itching to fix what I couldn't. Moving to Willow Grove was supposed to be a fresh start, a way to ease the strain of his condition. The community promised everything we needed: wide doorways for his wheelchair on bad days, an accessible pool for low-impact exercise, flat terrain that wouldn't tax his energy. I remember walking through the model home, the scent of fresh paint in the air, picturing Ethan in the sunlit kitchen, his laughter filling the space as he chopped vegetables for dinner. The real estate agent, a cheerful woman named Linda with a penchant for floral scarves, raved about the community's amenities, her voice bright. But her smile faltered when she handed us the HOA handbook, a 120-page tome that dictated every detail of life in Willow Grove. Rules governed the exact shade of white for shutters, eggshell, not ivory, the maximum length of grass blades, 2 inches, no exceptions, even the types of flowers allowed in front yards. Roses, yes. Daisies, no. I skimmed it, my stomach tightening at the sheer rigidity, but I pushed the unease aside. We needed this move for Ethan. I couldn't let a rulebook stop us. We should have paid more attention to the warning signs. Linda mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Willow Grove had the strictest HOA in the county, led by Eleanor Prescott, a woman who'd ruled the board for 2 decades with an iron fist. "She's particular," Linda said, her voice cautious, choosing her words like stepping over glass. "But she keeps the community pristine." I didn't think much of it then, but I should have. Eleanor was a retired corporate lawyer in her late 60s, with sharp gray eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. Her gaze as cold as the marble floors of the community center. Her silver hair was always perfectly pinned, her posture rigid, as if she'd been carved from stone. She'd taken over the HOA after her husband's death, a tech mogul who'd left her a fortune and, apparently, a void she filled with control. Her clipboard a constant companion as she patrolled the neighborhood like a general inspecting her troops. We met Eleanor during a mandatory welcome interview in the community center, a sterile room with beige walls and a faint scent of lemon cleaner that stung my nose. She sat behind a polished desk, a dossier on us already open in front of her, her fingers tracing the edges of the paper. I felt a chill as her gaze flickered to Ethan's cane, her lips tightening into a thin line, a flicker of disdain crossing her face. "Mr. and Mr. Harper," she began, her tone clipped, each word enunciated with precision. "Willow Grove prides itself on excellence. I see you have specific needs." The way she said needs made my skin crawl, as if Ethan's condition was an inconvenience to her perfect community, a smudge on her pristine canvas. "We do allow medical accommodations," she continued, her eyes narrowing slightly. "But they must not detract from the community's aesthetic. I trust you understand." I swallowed my irritation, keeping my voice even, though my hands clenched into fists under the table. "Ethan needs full accessibility in our home," I said, my tone firm but measured. "We've prepared architectural plans that meet both his needs and your standards." Eleanor's smile was a tight, practiced thing, never reaching her eyes, her fingers tapping the dossier like a judge delivering a verdict. "Aesthetic harmony is non-negotiable," she replied, her voice cold. "We've maintained perfection for 20 years under my leadership, and I intend to keep it that way." Ethan, always the diplomat, leaned forward, his voice warm despite the tension in the room, his hand resting lightly on my arm to steady me. "We respect the need for standards, Ms. Prescott. We'd love to work together to find solutions." Eleanor nodded curtly, but her expression remained cold, her fingers still tapping that dossier, a rhythmic warning. We left the meeting with a knot in my stomach, the air between us heavy as we drove home, the silence broken only by the hum of the engine. "She's going to be a problem," I muttered, glancing at Ethan, my hands tied on the steering wheel. He squeezed my hand, his touch cool against my skin, grounding me as always. "We'll figure out, Daniel. We always do." I wanted to believe him, but a part of me, a part honed by years of sizing up danger in burning buildings, knew we were walking into a fight. We told ourselves that with patience and clear communication, we could navigate Eleanor's rules. We were wrong. The trouble started within days of moving in, the ink on our mortgage papers barely dry. We submitted plans for a wheelchair ramp at our front door, designed to blend seamlessly with our home's modern aesthetic, clean lines, a soft gray to match the siding, unobtrusive yet functional. I'd spent hours with the architect, poring over blueprints late into the night, ensuring it was perfect for Ethan while meeting Eleanor's precious standards. Her rejection letter arrived in a crisp envelope, the paper heavy in my hands, her words cutting. "The ramp disrupts the street's visual flow. Use the back entrance instead." The suggestion was absurd, a cruel mockery of Ethan's reality. The backyard was a maze of uneven pavers and a steep drop to the garden. Impossible for Ethan to navigate during a flare-up, especially in his wheelchair, the wheels catching on every jagged edge. I could see the frustration in his eyes as he read the letter, his jaw tight, his hands trembling slightly. "I'm not a second-class citizen," he said quietly, his voice a mix of anger and hurt, the words hanging heavy in the air between us. I appealed the decision, my voice tight with frustration as I explained to the HOA board how the back entrance endangered Ethan's safety, my emails meticulous, my arguments backed by accessibility laws. I sat at our kitchen table, the glow of my laptop casting shadows on the walls, typing until my fingers ached, but Eleanor's responses were unyielding, each one a brick in the wall she'd built against us. After a month of back and forth, letters that arrived like clockwork, meetings where her tone dripped with condescension, phone calls where I could hear the smirk in her voice, she finally approved a ramp. But it was a hollow victory, a bitter compromise. The design she permitted was narrower than we needed, forcing Ethan to maneuver his wheelchair with painful precision, his arms trembling with effort as he navigated the tight space. It cost twice as much as our original plan, the invoice a slap in the face, and I watched him struggle up that ramp the first time, his breath coming in short gasps, his face pale with exertion. The rage I felt in that moment was a living thing, a fire in my chest I couldn't extinguish. Then came the parking dispute, another blow in Eleanor's relentless campaign. We'd converted our garage into a therapy space for Ethan, complete with a padded mat for stretching and a small desk where he could record his podcast, the microphone a lifeline to the outside world. It meant parking our modified van with a visible wheelchair lift in the driveway, its white exterior gleaming under the Georgia sun. One humid evening, as the cicadas buzzed in the trees and the air smelled of rain, Eleanor knocked on our door, her clipboard in hand, her heels clicking sharply on our porch like a metronome of judgment. "Commercial vehicles are prohibited in driveways," she said, her gaze fixed on Ethan, who sat in his wheelchair just inside, his face pale from a long day, his hands resting limply in his lap. "It ruins the neighborhood's elegance." I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm, but my voice shook with barely contained anger, the heat rising in my chest. "It's not a commercial vehicle, Miss Prescott. It's a medical necessity for Ethan, a personal vehicle with a wheelchair lift." Eleanor's smile was a cold, calculated thing, her eyes glinting with something like triumph, as if she'd caught us in a trap. "The bylaws classify any vehicle with visible equipment as commercial," she replied, her voice sharp as a blade. "The fine is $300 per day. I suggest you comply." I stepped closer, my heart pounding, the air between us crackling with tension. The Americans with Disabilities Act protects our right to necessary accommodations. "You can't fine us for this." Eleanor didn't flinch, her posture unyielding, her clipboard shield. "You agreed to our bylaws when you bought the property," she countered, her voice slicing through the humid air. "The ADA doesn't supersede that. If this community's standards don't suit you, perhaps you'd be happier elsewhere." Her words hit like a slap, a clear message: conform or leave. I stood there, my chest tight, my hands trembling at my sides as she turned on her heel and walked away, her clipboard swinging like a gavel, her heels echoing down the driveway. Ethan reached for my hand, his touch cool against my skin, his voice a whisper. "Don't let her get to you," he said, but I could hear the strain in his tone, the weight of being seen as a burden, an outsider in our own home. Eleanor's harassment didn't stop there. She seemed to take a perverse pleasure in targeting us, her clipboard a constant presence as she patrolled the neighborhood, her eyes always searching for infractions. She cited us for a medical alert button we'd installed by our pool. Unauthorized exterior fixture, she called it, though it was a discreet gray box that blended with the fence, its purpose to save Ethan's life in a crisis. She issued another violation for storing Ethan's spare wheelchair on our covered patio, claiming recreational equipment must be hidden, as if his mobility aid was a piece of clutter to be ashamed of. Each citation was a dagger, a reminder that she saw Ethan's disability as a blemish on her perfect community, a disruption to her vision of Willow Grove as a showcase of wealth and vitality. I responded to each one with patient explanations, citing accessibility laws, my fingers trembling as I typed late into the night, but Eleanor always found a technicality to justify her actions, her responses arriving like clockwork, each one a fresh wound. What made it worse was her selective enforcement, a hypocrisy that burned in my gut. Our neighbor to the left, a wealthy retiree named Margaret, left her vintage convertible parked in her driveway every weekend. A clear violation of the same, no visible vehicles rule Eleanor used against us, its cherry red paint a beacon of defiance. Across the street, a family had installed a swing set that wasn't on the approved equipment list, its bright red frame a stark contrast to the muted tones of Willow Grove, laughter echoing from the backyard as children played. But Eleanor turned a blind eye to them, her allies in the community, while scrutinizing our every move, her gaze lingering on Ethan's wheelchair with a disdain that made my blood boil. It was clear she targeted us because Ethan's disability was visible, a challenge to her curated image of perfection. Through whispered conversations at neighborhood events, we learned we weren't alone. At a barbecue where the smell of grilled corn filled the air and the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the lawns, Margaret confided in us over a glass of lemonade, her voice low, her hands twisting the hem of her blouse. "Eleanor fined me $200 for a temporary ramp when my sister visited last year. She broke her ankle and needed a wheelchair. I took it down after a week, but Eleanor wouldn't budge on the fine. She said it lowered the community's appeal. At a book club meeting in the community center, the air thick with the scent of coffee and old books, a young mother named Clara shared her own story, her eyes brimming with tears as she clutched a tattered copy of Pride and Prejudice. She cited us for a sensory swing in our backyard, said it was unsightly. My son has autism. He needed to calm down during meltdowns. I had to fight her for months to keep it, and she still glares at us every time she passes. These stories, each one a thread of shared frustration, wove a tapestry of Eleanor's tyranny. But most residents had given up fighting, choosing instead to stay under her radar, their voices silenced by fear. The HOA vice president, Nathan Brooks, was a retired teacher with a kind face and a soft voice, a stark contrast to Eleanor's icy demeanor. At the community picnic, as children ran through the grass, their laughter a fleeting balm, and the smell of barbecue wafted through the air, he pulled me aside, his expression troubled, his glasses slipping down his nose. "Eleanor thinks she's protecting Willow Grove's prestige," he said, his voice low to avoid being overheard, his eyes darting toward her as she stood by the grill, clipboard in hand. "She truly believes these rules maintain property values, but she lacks compassion. I've tried to reason with her, but she dominates the board, has for 20 years. No one's dared to run against her." I nodded, grateful for his empathy, but the weight of his words settled heavily on my shoulders. We were up against a machine, one that had crushed dissent for decades, and I felt the first stirrings of despair, a cold hand around my heart. Amidst this tension, I threw myself into my new role as fire chief, the station a refuge from the suffocating atmosphere of Willow Grove. The Magnolia County Department I'd inherited was a mess. Outdated equipment that creaked and groaned, inconsistent training that left my team unprepared, response times that lagged far behind national standards, each second a potential death sentence. I spent long hours at the station, my desk cluttered with reports, my mind racing with strategies to improve our protocols. I trained my team relentlessly, running drills until sweat soaked through our uniforms, the heat of the Georgia sun unforgiving, determined to ensure no family would lose a loved one because we were too slow. But every night, as I drove home through Willow Grove's manicured streets, the lawns eerily perfect under the streetlights, I felt the weight of Eleanor's scrutiny, a constant reminder that our sanctuary was anything but safe. Ethan, meanwhile, was finding his footing despite the challenges, his spirit a beacon in the darkness. He joined a local lupus support group at the hospital, a small circle of patients who met weekly in a brightly lit room, the walls covered in posters about mindfulness and hope. I'd watch him come home from those meetings, his eyes brighter, his voice lighter, as he told me about a new friend who'd recommended a meditation app that helped with pain, his hands gesturing animatedly despite the stiffness in his fingers. He also started a podcast about living with chronic illness, recording episodes in our converted garage, the space filled with the soft hum of his microphone, his voice steady as he shared tips on managing flare-ups or navigating medical bureaucracy. On his good days, he'd sit by the window with a cup of chamomile tea, the sunlight catching the flecks of gold in his eyes, a soft smile playing on his lips as he watched the birds flit through the trees. In those moments, I'd feel a flicker of hope that we could make this work, that we could carve out a life here despite Eleanor's shadow. But that hope shattered on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the air heavy with the promise of rain. I was at the fire station, hunched over a map with my command staff, analyzing response data for gated communities. Ironic, given what was about to happen. We were pinpointing areas with delayed response times, brainstorming solutions, the room filled with the scratch of pens and the murmur of voices when the call came. My radio crackled to life, the dispatcher's voice urgent, cutting through the noise like a blade. "Chief Harper, 911 call from your residence. Male, 42, severe lupus flare, chest pain, shortness of breath, possible cardiac involvement." My heart stopped, the map slipping from my hands, the room tilting as the words sank in. "Ethan." I bolted from my SUV, my boots pounding against the concrete, my mind racing with images of Ethan alone, struggling to breathe, his hands shaking as he dialed for help, his voice a faint whisper against the panic. The dispatcher had already sent paramedic Sarah Jennings and her team to our home, and I trusted Sarah implicitly. She was one of my best, a 15-year veteran with a calm demeanor that put even the most panicked patients at ease, her steady hands a lifeline in chaos. But as I sped toward Willow Grove, lights flashing, the siren a wail that matched the scream in my chest, my radio crackled again. Sarah's voice came through, tense and clipped, a note of disbelief in her tone. "Chief, we're being blocked at Willow Grove's gate." My stomach dropped, a cold sweat breaking out across my skin, the world narrowing to the sound of her voice. "Blocked? It's an emergency!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the SUV, my hands trembling on the wheel. Sarah's response was grim, the strain evident in every word. "The HOA president won't let us through. Says we're violating daytime vehicle rules." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, my vision blurring with panic, the road ahead a haze of fear. Ethan was alone, his heart racing, his lungs struggling for air, and Eleanor was standing in the way, her rules a barrier between him and survival. "Put her on," I growled, my voice raw with a terror I'd never felt in all my years as a firefighter. There was a moment of static, the sound crackling like my fraying nerves. Then Eleanor's voice came through, cold and unyielding, as if she were discussing a parking ticket rather than a man's life. "Chief Harper, this is Eleanor Prescott, president of Willow Grove Estates HOA. Our bylaws prohibit emergency vehicles between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. without prior board approval. It disrupts the community's tranquility." Her words were a knife, each one twisting deeper, the faint wail of the ambulance siren in the background a cruel reminder of what was at stake. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with a mix of rage and dread, my mind flooded with images of Ethan, his pale face, his trembling hands, his eyes wide with fear as he waited for help that wasn't coming. "My husband is in a medical crisis," I shouted, my voice breaking, the fear clawing at my chest, a primal thing I couldn't control. "This is an emergency exception. You have to let them through." Eleanor's tone didn't waver, her composure infuriating, a wall of ice against my fire. "Medical transport isn't listed as an exception in our bylaws," she replied, her voice as sharp as the crack of a gavel. "If it's truly urgent, perhaps Ethan could meet us at the gate, where you could use a private vehicle to avoid disrupting the community with sirens." The sheer absurdity of her suggestion, that Ethan, who was likely unable to move, his heart racing, his breath shallow, should somehow drag himself to the gate, left me speechless for a moment, my mind reeling. I floored the gas, the engine roaring as I sped toward Willow Grove, my mind a storm of fear and rage, the speedometer climbing as the world blurred past. I pictured Ethan on the floor, his chest heaving, his eyes wide with panic, waiting for help that wasn't coming, each second stretching into an eternity. Every moment Eleanor delayed could mean the difference between recovery and permanent damage, or worse. I couldn't lose him. Not like this. Not to her. As I raced toward the community, I radioed Sarah again, my voice trembling, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Sarah, what's his status? Can you get a visual?" Her response was strained, the sound of the crowd growing louder in the background, a chaotic hum of voices. "We can't see him, Chief. We're still at the gate. The president's car is blocking the entrance, and she's refusing to move." My blood ran cold, a wave of nausea washing over me, the taste of Balsharp in my throat. I was still 5 minutes away, 5 minutes that felt like a lifetime, each second a hammer against my heart. I could almost hear Ethan's labored breathing, feel his fear as he waited for me, for help, for anything, his faith in me a weight I couldn't bear to fail. When I arrived at Willow Grove's imposing entry gate, the scene was chaos, a nightmare unfolding under the midday sun. Eleanor had parked her sleek black SUV directly in the path of the ambulance, its lights flashing impotently against her windshield, the red and blue a desperate plea against her indifference. She stood beside it, arms crossed, her binder of HOA regulations open on the hood like a manifesto, her silver hair glinting in the light. The gate guard, Tom, a wiry man in his 50s with a nervous tic, shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between Eleanor and the growing crowd of residents, his hands hovering over the control panel. Some residents held phones, filming the standoff, their voices a rising tide of anger, while others shouted in protest, their words a jumbled chorus of outrage. Nathan Brooks, the HOA vice president, was pleading with her, his voice rising over the din, his glasses slipping down his nose as he gestured frantically. Eleanor, this is life or death. The rules aren't meant to stop medical care. Eleanor's response was sharp, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade, her posture unyielding. If we bend the rules now, Nathan, chaos will follow. Next, it'll be delivery trucks claiming emergency status. Her refusal to yield, even as the ambulance siren wailed, a piercing cry that echoed my own, was maddening. I leapt from my SUV, my fire chief uniform commanding attention, my boots slamming against the pavement, the air thick with tension, the scent of freshly cut grass a cruel contrast to the urgency of the moment. "Move your car, Ms. Prescott," I bellowed, my voice raw with fear, my hands trembling at my sides, the weight of Ethan's life pressing down on me. Eleanor turned to me, her expression a mix of irritation and defiance, as if I were a child throwing a tantrum, her gray eyes cold and unfeeling. "Chief Harper, you can't intimidate me," she said, her voice steady, each word a deliberate strike. "Willow Grove has standards, and I'm here to enforce them." A neighbor, a middle-aged man with a toddler on his hip, shouted from the crowd, his voice cracking with emotion. "Let them through. This is madness." A retired doctor, her white hair pulled into a bun, stepped forward, her voice trembling with anger, her hands clenched at her sides. "Lupus flares can be fatal if untreated. Heart involvement, organ damage. You're risking his life over a rule." I stepped closer to Eleanor, my chest heaving, my voice low and dangerous. The rage I'd held back now a wildfire I couldn't contain. "My husband is having a medical emergency. Every second you delay could have permanent consequences for his health. Move your car now." Eleanor's jaw tightened, her eyes narrowing, a flicker of defiance in her gaze. "The rules apply to everyone, Chief. Your position doesn't grant you special privileges." Her words were a spark to the fire already burning inside me, and I felt the crowd's anger swell, a wave of voices rising in protest. Clara, the mother from the book club, pushed forward, her face flushed with fury, her voice shaking. "Eleanor, you find me for my son's swing, but this is a man's life. Have you no shame?" The crowd's anger was palpable now, a living thing that pulsed through the air, a collective roar of defiance. Nathan stepped forward, his face flushed, but his voice firm, his hand steady as he pointed to the binder on Eleanor's hood. "Eleanor, Section 15 of the bylaws grants emergency vehicles access. Tom, open the gate now." Tom hesitated, his hand hovering over the control panel, his eyes wide with uncertainty, then nodded, the gate beginning to creak open, the sound a grating relief. Eleanor's mouth opened to protest, her lips parting in indignation, but I cut her off, my voice a growl, the fury in my chest spilling over. "If that car isn't moved in the next 10 seconds, it'll be towed, and you'll be arrested." Something in my tone, or perhaps the fury in my eyes, finally broke through her facade. Eleanor's face flushed, her lips pressing into a thin line, a crack in her icy composure. But she moved toward her SUV, jerking it forward just enough to clear the path, her movements sharp with resentment. The gate swung open fully, and the ambulance sped through, its tires screeching against the pavement, the sound a lifeline I clung to. I followed close behind in my SUV, my heart pounding, my hands shaking on the wheel, the world narrowing to the road ahead, to Ethan. Eleanor, unwilling to concede defeat, climbed into her car and trailed us. Her binder still clutched in her lap like a shield, her presence a shadow I couldn't escape. When I reached our home, Sarah and her team were already inside, their equipment scattered across the living room floor, the air filled with the sharp scent of antiseptic and the beep of a portable monitor. I found Ethan crumpled by the couch, his face pale, his chest heaving with shallow breaths, a faint sheen of sweat on his brow. His hands trembled as he reached for me, his voice a faint whisper, barely audible over the chaos. I couldn't get up. I tried. "I'm sorry." His words broke me, a sob catching in my throat as I knelt beside him, my hands cupping his face, my thumbs brushing against his clammy skin. "You're safe now, love. I'm here. You don't have to apologize for anything," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, my chest tight with a mix of relief and guilt. His skin was cold, his hazel eyes clouded with pain and fear, and I felt a wave of guilt for not being there sooner, for not protecting him from Eleanor's cruelty, the weight of my failure a stone in my gut. Ethan's gaze flickered to the door, where the paramedics were setting up their gear, then back to me, his brow furrowing with concern even in his distress. "There was trouble at the gate, wasn't there?" he asked, his voice faint but perceptive, always attuned to others, always worrying for me, even as he fought for breath. I forced a smile, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead, my fingers lingering against his skin. "Nothing for you to worry about," I said, though my mind was already racing with the legal violations Eleanor had committed, the danger she'd caused, the sheer callousness of her actions. Sarah knelt beside us, her stethoscope pressed to Ethan's chest, her expression grim, her movements swift and precise. "Tachycardia, low oxygen levels, an acute flare with possible cardiac involvement," Sarah said, her voice steady but urgent, her eyes meeting mine with a gravity that made my stomach lurch. "He's reporting chest pain and shortness of breath, and his pulse is erratic. We need to get him to the hospital for 4 steroids and cardiac monitoring now." As the paramedics prepared Ethan for transport, lifting him onto the stretcher with careful hands, their voices a low hum of coordination, I stayed by his side, my hand wrapped around his, my thumb tracing circles on his skin, a silent promise that I wouldn't let go. I whispered reassurances, my voice a lifeline in the chaos. But inside, I was screaming at Eleanor, at the system that had allowed this to happen, at myself for not foreseeing it, for not fighting harder sooner. Just as the paramedics were securing Ethan's stretcher, the wheels creaking against the hardwood floor, Eleanor appeared in our doorway, Nathan trailing behind her with an apologetic look, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Chief Harper," she began, her tone still infuriatingly formal, as if she hadn't just endangered a man's life. "I must inform you that this emergency vehicle in your driveway violates Section 92 of our bylaws." I cut her off, my voice low and deadly, the rage I'd held back now spilling over like a dam breaking, my hands trembling at my sides. "My husband is fighting for his life because of you. If you speak one more word about your precious rules in my home, I will have you arrested for obstruction. Is that clear?" Eleanor's face flushed, her mouth opening to protest, her eyes flashing with indignation. But Nathan gently took her arm, his voice firm, a rare edge to his usually soft tone. "We should go, Eleanor. This isn't the time." As they retreated, their footsteps fading down the hall, I overheard her hiss, her voice sharp with resentment. "He can't speak to me like that. I'm the HOA president." Nathan's response was sharp, a crack in his usual calm. "And he's the fire chief whose husband you just endangered. We need an emergency board meeting now." I turned back to Ethan, my focus narrowing to him, to the faint rise and fall of his chest, to the way his hand still gripped mine even as the paramedics wheeled him out, the stretcher rattling softly against the threshold. The next few hours were a blur of hospital corridors, the sterile smell of antiseptic stinging my nose, the steady beep of monitors a constant reminder of Ethan's fragility. Ethan was admitted to the ICU, his condition critical but stable, the fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across his pale face. Dr. Rivera, his rheumatologist, met me in the hallway, her expression grave, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. "Lupus flares need immediate treatment to prevent organ damage," she said, her voice low, her eyes meeting mine with a weight that made my chest tighten. The delay in getting him here likely intensified the inflammation. His heart and kidneys are showing signs of stress. "We've started 4 steroids, but had the ambulance been delayed much longer, the damage could have been permanent or fatal." Her words were a punch to the gut, the reality of how close I'd come to losing Ethan crashing over me like a wave, pulling me under. I sank into a chair outside his room, my head in my hands, my chest tight with a mix of relief and fury, the plastic seat cold against my thighs. Ethan, from his hospital bed, reached for my hand, his voice weak but steady, his fingers cool against mine. "Don't let this break you, Daniel. We'll get through it," he whispered, his hazel eyes steady despite the pain, his resilience a lifeline in the storm. I kissed his forehead, my lips lingering against his skin, the faint scent of his shampoo grounding me, and whispered, "This isn't over. I'll make sure this never happens again." As Ethan rested, his breathing steadier under the hum of the 4 drip, I turned my attention to the systemic problem Eleanor represented, my resolve hardening like steel. As fire chief, I had the authority and the responsibility to ensure emergency services could access every corner of my jurisdiction without obstruction, to protect every resident from the kind of danger Ethan had faced. I contacted the county attorney, my voice steady but urgent as I recounted the incident. The radio logs a damning record, the resident footage a visual indictment of Eleanor's actions. She confirmed what I'd suspected, her tone grave. Eleanor's actions were a criminal offense under Georgia law, a felony obstruction of emergency services. No HOA bylaw could supersede that, no matter how tightly Eleanor clung to her rules. I launched a comprehensive safety audit of Willow Grove Estates, my team working late into the night, our flashlights cutting through the darkness as we inspected every corner of the community. What we found was worse than I'd feared. Blocked fire hydrants hidden behind overgrown shrubs, their red paint chipped and faded. Roads too narrow for emergency vehicles to turn, a death trap in a crisis. Unapproved emergency protocols that Eleanor had implemented without oversight, her signature scrawled across documents that defied state law. The community had been operating under her self-created rules for years, a ticking time bomb waiting to endanger lives. Each violation a testament to her unchecked power. I scheduled an emergency meeting with the HOA board, county officials, and representatives from all emergency services, determined to hold Eleanor accountable and protect every resident of Willow Grove, my resolve a fire that burned brighter with every discovery. The meeting marked a turning point, a crack in the foundation of Eleanor's reign. I presented our findings to the HOA board, my voice steady as I displayed photographs of blocked hydrants and narrow roads, the projector screen casting stark images across the room. I played the radio logs of the ambulance being denied entry, Sarah's voice tense, my own breaking with fear, and showed footage from a resident's phone, Eleanor's SUV a barricade against the flashing lights. The board members exchanged alarmed glances, their murmurs a rising tide, while Eleanor sat rigid, her face pale but defiant. Nathan proposed an immediate overhaul of Willow Grove's emergency protocols, ensuring unrestricted access for first responders, his voice firm, with a conviction I hadn't seen before. He then moved for an emergency vote to remove Eleanor as president, a motion that passed with a unanimous roar, the room erupting in a collective exhale of relief. The community rallied in the days that followed. A sleeping giant awakened. At a packed forum in the community center, the air thick with the scent of coffee and determination, residents shared their stories, their voices a chorus of long-suppressed pain. A diabetic man spoke of being fined for a medical fridge, his voice trembling as he described hiding it in his garage to avoid Eleanor's wrath. A stroke survivor recounted being cited for a handrail, her hands shaking as she gripped the podium, her eyes bright with tears. The vote to remove Eleanor was overwhelming, a landslide of ballots that swept her from power. and Nathan took her place, his first act of formal apology to Ethan and me, his words heavy with sincerity. Under Nathan's leadership, Willow Grove transformed, its heart beating anew. Accessibility became a priority, with new committees to support residents' needs, their meetings filled with voices once silenced. The Harper Protocol was born, a countywide policy ensuring emergency access in gated communities, a legacy of our fight that spread to neighboring counties, a shield against future injustice. Ethan, now recovering, his smile brighter with each passing day, turned his podcast into a platform for advocacy, inspiring others to fight for their rights, his voice a beacon for those in the shadows. Eleanor moved away, her departure a quiet surrender, leaving a curt note in our mailbox, her handwriting sharp as her gaze. I upheld Willow Grove's standards, but I regret any distress caused. Ethan read it aloud, his voice steady, then shook his head, a soft smile playing on his lips. She'll never understand. Rules should lift us up, not tear us down. 6 months later, Willow Grove was a model community, celebrated for its inclusivity, its lawns no longer a mask for oppression, but a canvas for connection. At a neighborhood festival, the air filled with the scent of blooming jasmine and the laughter of children, Nathan raised a glass to us, his voice warm with gratitude. To the Harpers, who showed us that a community's heart lies in its care for each other. Ethan leaned into me, his hand warm in mine, his whisper a balm against the scars of our fight. Not how I imagined fitting in, but I'll take it. What would you do if an HOA blocked care for someone you love? Share your story in the comments. We're reading every one, and your voice could inspire change. As a fire chief, I've seen countless emergencies, but none taught me more about the danger of blind authority than watching my husband's ambulance be stopped by a rulebook. Communities thrive on compassion, not control, on lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down. If this story moved you, don't wait. Subscribe to Daily Narrated Stories now. We share life-changing tales of courage and justice every day, and we need your support to keep going. Let's hit 1,000 subscribers this week. Your click could make all the difference. Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll see you in the next story on Daily Narrated Stories, where every tale reminds us of the power of resilience and hope.